Imagine standing outside 20,000 years ago. You are in northern Siberia, where winter temperatures can fall far below freezing. The air hurts your lungs, the ground is hard, and somewhere across the white horizon, you can see an animal almost twice the height of your body. You are looking at a woolly mammoth. An adult woolly mammoth could reach roughly 3.4 meters at the shoulder and weigh several tons. Yet the mammoth was not an isolated giant. Around 20,000 years ago, your world was filled with enormous horses, bison, rhinoceroses, giant deer, and other large herbivores. And this creates a strange question. Why? Why would evolution build such enormous bodies in one of the coldest environments your planet had ever seen? You might assume the cold should make animals smaller. Instead, for many Ice Age mammals, it appears to have done the opposite. In 1847, German biologist Carl Bergmann described a pattern that became known as Bergmann's rule. Within many related groups of mammals, larger-bodied animals tend to occur in colder environments. The reason is physics. A large body contains more volume compared with its surface area, which means it loses heat more slowly. Imagine holding a tiny cup of hot water beside a large container of hot water. Both are exposed to the same freezing air, but the smaller one cools faster. Your body follows the same basic principle. For an animal living through months of Arctic cold, extra mass can become a biological advantage. That helps explain the mammoth, but it does not explain the entire Ice Age, because being huge requires enormous amounts of food. A 5-ton mammoth cannot survive on a few mouthfuls of grass. So, you have a second mystery. Where did all that food come from? At the peak of the last Ice Age, around 20,000 years ago, much of northern Eurasia and Alaska was part of an ecosystem often called the Mammoth Steppe. Instead of the wet tundra you might imagine today, large regions were cold, dry grasslands filled with abundant herbaceous plants. That distinction matters. Cold does not automatically mean lifeless. In places such as ancient Beringia, low precipitation and low snow helped create open, productive grasslands. The dry ground also gave large animals a firm surface to walk across while they searched for food. You could think of the landscape as a giant frozen pasture, and the animals were perfectly built to use it. In 2018, researchers including Dan Zhu, Philippe Sieyès, Gerhard Krinner, and Sergei Zimov modeled the ancient ecosystem and found something surprising. Large-bodied herbivores could actually make better use of grass production because their size helped them process relatively low-quality vegetation efficiently. A larger animal also has a larger digestive system, which matters when your diet is mostly rough grass. So the giant body was not simply extra weight, it was a survival system. Your mammoth could carry huge reserves of energy, travel long distances, endure severe cold, and during the short productive season, consume enough vegetation to build reserves for winter. But here's where it gets stranger. The Ice Age did not create giant animals simply because everything was cold. It created an entire ecosystem where being giant could actually work. And once that ecosystem began to disappear, the same body that had made these animals so successful could become a burden. That is where the real story begins. Around 14,700 years ago, the world began changing. The ice sheets started retreating, temperatures rose, glaciers pulled northward, and sea levels began climbing. The Mammoth Steppe started breaking apart. You might expect giant animals to celebrate a warmer world, but instead, many of them began disappearing. Around 10,000 years ago, woolly mammoths had vanished from most of mainland Eurasia and North America. The giant ground sloth was gone from much of the Americas, and giant deer disappeared from large parts of Europe and Asia. The giants were failing, but the climate was not the only thing changing. At the end of the Ice Age, open grasslands were replaced across many regions by shrubs, forests, and wetter environments. For a mammoth, that was a serious problem. Your enormous body was built for an enormous landscape. A mammoth could consume roughly 150 kilograms of vegetation in a day, depending on its size and environment. Its survival depended on finding enough edible plants across huge territories. When those grasslands became fragmented, simply being large became expensive. And there was another pressure: human. By roughly 15,000 years ago, modern humans were already occupying large parts of Eurasia and North America. You were no longer just another predator on the landscape. You could cooperate, you could communicate, you could create specialized weapons, you could track an animal for hours or even days. A mammoth might weigh several tons, but you did not need to overpower it directly. You only needed to find the weakness in its survival strategy. Archaeological sites show that Ice Age humans repeatedly used mammoth meat, bones, hides, and tusks. At Mezhirich in Ukraine, 4 mammoth bone dwellings dating to roughly 15,000 years ago demonstrate just how completely humans could exploit these animals. Mammoth bones became structural material, hides became shelter, and the animal was not simply food, it was an entire resource system. But here's where it gets stranger. Not every mammoth disappeared at the same time. On Wrangel Island, north of Siberia, a small population population survived until roughly 4,000 years ago. That means mammoths were still alive when humans were already building some of the world's earliest civilizations. The pyramids of Egypt began rising around 4,500 years ago, while mammoths were still surviving in the Arctic. So, climate change alone cannot tell the whole story. Something about becoming isolated mattered too. Wrangel Island was once connected to mainland Siberia, but rising sea levels eventually turned it into an island. The mammoths trapped there became increasingly isolated, their population became smaller, their gene pool became narrower, and genetic studies have found evidence of severe population bottleneck followed by harmful mutations accumulating in the isolated group. The giant body that once helped your ancestors survive an enormous continental ecosystem could not protect them from a shrinking one. And this reveals something important about gigantism. Being bigger is not simply being stronger. It is a trade. A larger body can conserve heat, store more energy, travel farther, and endure harsh conditions. But it also needs more food, more territory, more time to grow, and often more stability. When an environment is vast and predictable, those costs can be worth paying. When the environment fragments, they become liabilities. Except, there was one final twist. Some of the animals that survived the Ice Age did not become enormous at all. On islands and isolated environments, evolution sometimes moved in the opposite direction. Large animals became smaller, while small animals sometimes became giants. The same evolutionary world that produced 5-ton mammoth could produce completely different bodies when the rules changed. So, the real question is no longer why Ice Age animals were so huge. It is why size itself became such a powerful advantage, and then, so suddenly, stopped being one. On Wrangel Island, the mammoth did something almost unbelievable. It survived. While mammoths disappeared from most of the world around 10,000 years ago, this isolated population continued for thousands more. By about 4,000 years ago, the last mammoths were gone, and their final chapter reveals something deeper about size, because evolution does not have a preferred direction. It does not always reward the strongest. It rewards whatever fits the environment in front of you. For millions of years, large bodies had worked. During the Ice Age, the rules favored them. Cold rewarded mass. Open grasslands provided enormous amounts of vegetation. Large territories supported large herbivores, and predators faced animals that were difficult and dangerous to kill. A mammoth was not just a bigger elephant. It was a biological answer to a particular world. Then that world disappeared. After the last glacial maximum around 20,000 years ago, warming transformed landscapes across Eurasia and North America. Forests expanded, grasslands contracted, freshwater systems changed, and human populations spread into new regions. The giant body remained, but the environment that made the giant body useful was fading. This is the strange part about evolution. Your body can be perfectly adapted to a world that no longer exists. The mammoth's thick fur was useful. Its layer of body fat was useful. Its enormous size was useful. Its curved tusks were useful. None of those traits were mistakes. They had worked for thousands of generations. The problem was that the environment changed faster than evolution could replace them. And this pattern did not belong only to mammoth. Across the late Pleistocene, numerous large mammals disappeared. In Australia, giant marsupials vanished. In North America, mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, and other megafauna disappeared. In Eurasia, woolly rhinos and other large herbivores declined. The exact causes varied by species and region. Climate mattered. Habitat change mattered. Human hunting likely mattered in some places, and in several cases, those pressures overlap. You can see the danger in one simple equation. The bigger the animal, the more resources it needs. The slower it often reproduces. A mammoth could not replace its population as quickly as a mouse. A smaller animal might survive the loss of one food source, but a 5-ton herbivore needs an entire landscape. That is why gigantism can be powerful and fragile. There is one final paradox. Today you live in a world where the largest terrestrial mammals are still enormous. African elephants can weigh more than 6,000 kilograms, while rhinos can exceed 2,000 kilograms. So gigantism never disappeared. It survived wherever the environment still supported. The Ice Age did not invent giants. It created conditions where giant bodies became exceptionally successful. Then those conditions changed, and the giants became remnants of an older world. When you imagine an Ice Age mammoth walking across Siberia 20,000 years ago, it is easy to see the animal as a monument to strength. But its size meant something else. It was evidence of a world rich enough to feed giants, cold enough to reward them, and stable enough to let them persist. The mammoth was enormous because its world allowed enormous life to work. When that world vanished, size stopped being an advantage. And perhaps that is the strangest thing about the Ice Age. The giants were never built for our world. They were built for theirs. And for a brief moment in Earth's history, their world was big enough for them.